I'm John Mackenzie. Coming up on Football Today.
Well, there it is. It's Liverpool's night. Silverware is the currency of success in football, and Liverpool have just hit the Champions League jackpot.
The winner to organise the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
FIFA's alleged tradition of bribery is taking a real human toll. 5,200 for the World Cup matches in Qatar. 5,200, that's not the number of fans or players or sponsorship benefactors. 5,200 is the number of workers expected to die building the infrastructure for the games by 2022.
Can you really enjoy a sport in a place where you're not accepted, essentially? Would you even feel okay to go to somewhere that is not accepting you as a person?
Later this month, Liverpool head to Qatar to compete in the Club World Cup in what is a test run for the World Cup in 2022. In this episode, we ask, what will we learn about the 2022 World Cup from Liverpool's trip to Qatar?
First thought was, well, that's interesting.
Ian Doyle is the chief Liverpool writer for the Liverpool ECHO.
Wasn't surprised in the sense that obviously with no Confederations Cup, FIFA needed a test tournament for the World Cup in 2022. I was mildly surprised that it would be the Club World Cup that Liverpool find themselves in.
So Liverpool are heading out to Qatar in December. When are they setting off and how long are they there for?
Well, they're playing Watford on the Saturday before they fly out, so it's not exactly set in stone yet. They're going to fly out either directly straight after that or the following day, so they'll be there for the best part of a week. In fact, it will be a week, which is a significant time to be away. I mean, it's 4,000 miles away, slap bang in the middle of a Premier League season where Liverpool just so happen to be quite clear at the top, and they'll also be hoping to still be in the Champions League. And of course, for anybody who knows, they also have a League Cup game that's getting played at the same time they're in Qatar, so that's caused a lot of interest up here. But, you know, the FIFA Club World Cup is the one thing they want to win more than that.
So what does Liverpool's Club World Cup schedule look like?
When they're over there, they'll be playing two games. Play a semi-final on Wednesday, December the 18th. But then 3 days later on Saturday, December the 21st, they'll be playing hopefully what they think will be a final. And that'll probably be against, if all things pan out the way we're expecting, Flamengo of Brazil.
We cannot accept to play in stadiums where people lost their lives. They built stadiums with blood.
Whenever Qatar is mentioned in the same breath as football, various human rights issues surrounding the country are quickly raised by charities and the media. Have the club done much from their end to assure the fans that this event will be safe and won't be problematic?
They've opened dialogue with several supporters groups. When it got confirmed, I know Spirit of Shankly put out a statement. They're obviously a supporters group, Liverpool, a big one. There's also been worries about the LGBT community. There's a supporters group called Cop Outs, and they actually went out last week, I think it was, and they came back saying that it actually wasn't what they feared. I know that being gay is illegal in Qatar, but for people going over there, they said it isn't going to be a problem from their experience. And I think that's one thing that the club are also trying to impose, is that it's about communication and about knowing what to expect. The club will be sending fans liaison support officer out there in Qatar as well when the tournament's on. So they are doing their bit to make sure that fans are educated so they know what they can do, what they can't do, because obviously going off to the Middle East, it's a different culture, and that's something that they're trying to impose on fans.
You recently visited Qatar. What were your impressions of the preparations being made for the Club World Cup by the Qataris?
The actual stadium that Liverpool are going to be playing in, which is the Education City Stadium, 40,000 capacity, we tried to get to it, but we couldn't actually get inside it because the day we went, the FIFA were there doing their inspections to make sure that the stadium's all right, because it wasn't quite finished. And when Liverpool play their first game, which will be the first game that's played at that stadium, it also happens to be the Qataris' National Day. So for the Qataris, they want to have it as a big surprise. You know, people turn up for the stadium to see it for the first time. It may also be the fact that they wouldn't let us there because it wasn't actually finished, so they didn't want us to say anything at the time. Looking ahead to the World Cup as well in 2022 is a big thing, because at the moment there's no public transport as such in Qatar. They don't have any trains, but they have just opened a metro, and there will be a metro line that's going out from Doha, the capital, to Education City, which is only about 20 minutes on the outskirts, so it's not too far. But getting the fans up there has been something that they know that they needed to get that sorted. It will be ready, because these things are always ready. But the fact that it was a month before the tournament starts when I was out there and they're still not quite ready isn't a massive concern as such, but they're confident it'll be done. The other two stadiums in which the tournament's getting played, because obviously there are other games not involving Liverpool, they're both played at stadiums that already existed and have been renovated. They're fine, it's just that they're saving the best one for Liverpool.
If this was a taste of what fans can expect at the World Cup in 2022, then Qatar impressed. A dazzling opening ceremony launched its first purpose-built stadium in Al Wakra, and keen to demonstrate its global appeal, organisers of the tournament invited international legends to watch the show.
When we were there, we actually saw one or two of the other stadiums that are being used for the World Cup that aren't quite finished, which are fantastic stadiums. The interesting thing is that they're all within about 40 or 50 miles of each other. There's 8 of them. The organisers are talking about we can have tickets whereby if there's 3 games in one day, fans can go the first game and then actually go the third game later in the evening, because you're able to do it because there's enough time in between.
This is the spectators area, and we have under-seat diffusers. This is designed in order to make sure that the air will engulf the spectators and make them live in a small bubble.
Obviously the World Cup's been moved to the November-December because of the weather. It's still hot during the day. They have this cooling technology which they've made a big play about, and we actually went into one of the stadiums. It actually works. It's so strange that you go in, and when you're sat in the stands or you're even by the side of the pitch, you can feel it. But then when you're in the middle of the field, you can feel it being cooler. The ball doesn't get blown away and stuff like that. It doesn't affect the dynamics of the ball, but the actual cooling technology works, and they were very proud to show us that. But that's a very minor thing compared to all the other issues that they're going to have to cope with when the World Cup comes along.
One word in particular has entered into the public's lexicon: kafala. Kafala means sponsorship in Arabic, and it's a system used in all Persian Gulf states to control and manage their huge migrant populations who build these countries' infrastructure. Over 90% of Qatar's population are migrant workers. They work for low wages, in high heat, and often live in sprawling labour camps away from the big cities. Essentially, kafala means that an employer is solely responsible for that worker's visa and well-being.
Did you get much of a sense of these other concerns being dealt with when you were out there in terms of human rights abuses? You've already mentioned the kafala workers' rights issues, the LGBT issues as well. Were the officials that you met making a huge effort to allay people's fears?
I can only go with what we saw. I must admit, there were a few of us went up. We actually went to one of the labour accommodation camps on one of the mornings. So we went up and actually saw and spoke to some of the migrant workers. And you know the way these things are, the organisers wanted us to see the best accommodation camp. For the Western world, seeing something like that, we can't quite comprehend it. But that's something that in the Middle East isn't just exclusive to Qatar, these accommodation camps. They are in other countries around there. The one thing we noticed is that the football being there, whether it's the World Cup or the Club World Cup, the spotlight's been on the Qatari government. They've had to improve certain standards. And if that's the one thing that comes out of this, then that's great, because it seems as though they are listening to people. They are moving in the right direction.
What do you think the fans' experience is going to be like in Qatar?
I mean, I spoke to a guy called Hassan Al-Thawadi, who's the Secretary General of the organising committee, who happens to be a Liverpool fan, actually. And so he was super excited about the fact Liverpool had qualified. I asked a question about the clash of cultures, because it's not just Liverpool fans going over there. There's going to be Brazilian fans going from Flamengo. There'll be Tunisian fans there, Mexican fans from some of the other clubs who've qualified. You know, he was honest and said, we don't actually know what it's going to be like until it actually happens, but they're putting everything in place to make sure there aren't any problems, in the sense that he believes it's about education and it's about the locals knowing what to expect from the English fans coming over and the Brazilians and whoever, but also then for the Liverpool fans or the Brazilians to know that when they come to a different country, there is a different culture they have to respect. For example, the one question a lot of Liverpool fans are talking about is alcohol, and yeah, there are no bars as such and there's no shops where you can buy it, but in all the hotels there are bars in the hotels, and all the fans will be staying in hotels, so that's not an issue. And it is about just being respectful to the local community as well. Qataris are used to having non-Qataris over, because I think something like 90% of the population is made up of foreigners to them. So they're used to that. It is probably going to be a question of, education. It's just being sensible, I think. But as they said, that they won't know for sure until everybody's over there as to how it's actually going to go.
So that's the official line. But what do the supporters have to say about things?
We stood up against the allocation of the World Cup to Qatar because of the workers' rights issues, and we stood in solidarity with the TUC at the time, really challenging the workers' rights and the deaths in Qatar at that time.
Joe Blott is the chair of Spirit of Shankly, a Liverpool supporters group.
Of course, when Liverpool qualified from winning the Champions League into the World Club Championship, it really brought that to the fore. The first email that we received off anybody was saying that, can we have a boycott of this completely? That was the initial sort of fan reaction.
How do you approach an event like this when you're a supporters group?
Liverpool were always going to play at Qatar, and it was very difficult for us as a union to say that Liverpool shouldn't play there. So what we did was we engaged with a number of organisations really to bring to the attention of the football club and indeed the Supreme Council of Qatar, and also our Football Supporters Association here in the UK and the Football Supporters Europe, because we felt there needed to be an adult discussion about it and a mature debate. Clearly there are two sides to any story. The side that we were aware of with the number of deaths that were being reported, the conditions that people were working in, the challenges around LGBT groups and what safety they would have when they travelled. So I think whilst we were initially calling out the World Cup, clearly it's brought quite fairly and squarely onto Liverpool fans' shoulders, really to take up this challenge and prepare the fan opportunity to go to Qatar if it's going to be there in 2022.
On the 22nd of October, you released a statement which included the following lines.
FIFA's decision to award the 2022 World Cup to the Gulf state has brought controversy and condemnation, with many fan groups and supporters concerned about migrant worker deaths, workers' rights and human rights, as well as being worried for their own safety and well-being. Spirit of Shankly join other organisations in calling on the Qatari authorities to take immediate steps to investigate and address the deeply troubling pattern of deaths of migrant workers.
How effective do you feel your approach has been to challenging the status quo over this tournament?
I think that's where we can say we've actually done a heck of a lot. In terms of the football club, we've had long dialogue with them, and I know that they've had private conversations with Supreme Committee as well. It was about, I think, us giving the space for the club to maybe say some of the things that they may not have been able to do, either politically with FIFA, etc. It's been reported that FIFA had allocated Liverpool a hotel. Liverpool did their own research on that hotel, found out that there'd been a number of deaths there, found out that the working arrangements had not been good, and they felt that was inappropriate for them to go, so they booked their own hotel, which again is a really positive approach, given that maybe they wouldn't have thought of that without the conversation that we'd had going back to June. So I do think there has been some improvements and some listening that's taking place as a consequence of the discussions that we've had.
What about when it comes to the state of Qatar itself? Have you affected any change there?
I think we can genuinely point to some changes that are happening, have happened. Our concern would be about the sustainability of all of that, but let's hope that what we've set on the road is a real change. And some of those are, firstly, starting with the LGBT discussions. We have gone in partnership, obviously, with Cop Outs, Liverpool's official LGBT group. They actually did a reconnaissance trip over to Qatar a few weeks ago to test out how they felt. Guy and his husband went over, they stayed in the hotels, they went freely about their business, and they said it felt safe. And Paul's husband particularly wasn't keen on going because he didn't feel safe, but he came back and said it was a good experience and he felt that it would be okay for LGBT fans to go. In terms of discussions around other aspects, we've seen that there's been a huge increase in the speed of activity to get workers' rights improved in recent times. We first approached Qatar authorities back in June. They have quickened up their activities around the likes of heat suits. The accommodation is now much improved. From what I understand, I've not seen it myself, but I've seen other reports by other people who've been over there to say that they are much better than they were. Cynically, I could say, well, actually the grounds are nearly finished now, so there's kind of maybe less risky work there. But let's again give credit. We said it's illegal to work during the hours of 11 and 4, I think it is, as a consequence of the heat. And, workers were clearly working at that time over the recent years. But they've stopped that now. Just in terms of worker-related deaths, we have asked the question and will continue to do so. We're just concerned that, in recent reports we've seen, like what was in The Guardian about 3 weeks ago, it's telling the number of young men who've died from heart conditions. Is that something that they had when they arrived? It doesn't appear to be so. And that can only be put down in The Guardian's word as a consequence of the heat exhaustion that they have. Certainly in terms of the fan arrangements, I'm absolutely convinced that the fan experience will be really positive. They've had conversations with us about the security, about policing, about stewarding, about holding concerts and ensuring that alcohol is available where it's needed, but obviously keeping the restrictions that they need to. And I think that'll be really good. And I'm looking forward to the feedback from people who are going over at the end of this month.
Obviously, the Club World Cup doesn't simply impact the fans ethically. There's also their knock-on impact on Liverpool's season schedule. Is there any sense that there are fans who feel as though the club is just being used as a pawn in a larger game on the global stage? It does seem as though this is more about Liverpool being a good test case for the World Cup in 2022.
It does feel that way to a certain extent from a fan's point of view. It's another expensive trip, isn't it? We want to see our team be the World Club champions. We've not had that before. What a fantastic achievement that would be. So it's something from fans' perspective, I think, starting to get excited about. But around the schedule, that has a massive impact. We're playing Aston Villa in a quarter-final of the League Cup, the night before the first game. That means that we're only going to have our youth team out playing there. That has impact on fans. Do we go to Aston Villa and can afford to go to Qatar as well? Do we make one choice or the other? If I go to Aston Villa, I'm only going to see the reserves playing. What does that mean? So we've had conversations with the club and they had conversations with Aston Villa and they've reduced the prices for that as a consequence. So there were impacts all around this. And I think that's the point, is that FIFA, as ever, couldn't care less about the football fan. They just see it as part of their role and duty. Liverpool being the team that they are, this will make that tournament a massive success, particularly if then playing a strong South American team. It's going to be, from their point of view, probably a full house for the final, assuming those two clubs get there, and massive television audience. So why would FIFA care about anybody else, let alone the club, but least of all the fans?
Aren't these sorts of issues not just part and parcel of Liverpool becoming more successful in a hyper-moneyed industry?
What's really important is that we work with the owners to make them understand what being a football fan is about. Remember one of the first discussions that we had with representatives of the owners, they were saying about, you as consumers will be looking at the product on the pitch. Unbelievable to think that we're now viewed as consumers and as a product on the pitch. We're not. We're football fans. We follow a football club. You don't flip-flop from one club to another just because one's not doing very well, so you choose someone else. And in terms of a product on a pitch, there's 11 players playing football, a game that we all love to do, a game that we aspire to do from grassroots to when you're very old and you've got creaky knees. Unfortunately, though, the view of it is, in terms of that genuinely capitalist approach, is about them making money. And to be fair, they say that. They want to maximise their income on a match day. They want to have the seat costing as much as it can cost to ensure that, as they see it, that they get the success on the pitch. And it's hard to argue at the moment, isn't it? Because if you see, the benefits of a £70 million centre-half and a nearly £70 million goalkeeper winning the Champions League and being 11 points clear at this point in the season, wow, of course you'd take that, but it can't be at any price. And, we keep the debate going with fans, with the club, as I say, with Football Supporters Association as well, so we get national support. Liverpool, their tagline at the moment is "This means more." So they use the fan base as a real selling point. Well, they've got to invest in that fan base then, because if they're not careful, it will only last for a couple of years.
We've talked to the media, we've talked to the fans, but there is one group of people who are conspicuously absent. the people of Qatar themselves?
Most people don't know anything about what a Qatari is, who lives there.
Matthew Barrett is one of the co-founders of GoClick.
2.6 million people, only 10% of them are Qataris. The rest are migrants and expats. Predominantly, 60% are South Asian. So getting a chance to actually hear from those people who live there about their lives, their football lives, their experiences in a country which has gone totally football crazy in the last 10 years, I felt was a real missing piece of the debate. I think for the first time we've really explored Qatari football culture from the perspective of those people living and working there.
Now, you founded GoClick in 2014. Tell us a little bit about what it is that GoClick does.
So GoClick is a global storytelling project. We find people from every country in the world. We ask them to tell their story from their own perspective through the lens of football. We do that by providing them all disposable analog cameras to start with, and then they show their football lives, the lives of themselves and their community through their photos and also in their own words. So it's very much giving the power and control to the people to provide the inside view on a country.
And you just launched your Qatar project, so tell us what that entails.
The narrative around Qatar has very much been, on one side, look how wonderful we are, look at all the amazing stadiums, and on the other side, look at this human rights abusing state which doesn't respect workers' welfare. They've changed the timing of the tournament. Do they even have a football culture? Is it too hot? Why should the Middle East get a World Cup? This is an outrage. And within the middle of that, there's a massive vacuum where you're not hearing from the people who live in Qatar.
So you interviewed how many people in the end?
So we have around 30 people that have taken part. Qataris and non-Qataris, male, female, all different types of background, workers, fans, players, journalists, photographers, a real cross-section of Qatari society.
So of those 30 stories, which were the ones that stood out for you?
Each one of them has their own value. I think for me, hearing from 15-year-old Qatari girls and a former women's national team player for Syria who now lives in Qatar were really powerful, because it really flips on its head a lot of our preconceived ideas around Qatar and the region and its relationship with women's football.
As soon as we arrived at the park, all of them ran to the pitch, took off their sandals and started playing. No one wanted to be the goalkeeper. All of them wanted to run and score. You can see the girls also wanted to play and score as well, because football is not just for boys, girls can also participate. Football is a really exciting game, and all of us have the right to enjoy it. It represents the Qatari culture and how much we as Qataris love football.
Was there anything that surprised you about the stories?
A lot of the expat community, whether they be a Ghanaian security guard, an Indian photographer, there really seems to be a real positivity around Qatar, which was quite surprising. I get a sense that they're slightly put out by some of the perceived criticism that the country gets. I think they all, by and large, acknowledge that the country's not perfect. The country has big issues they need to work through, and they're attempting to change. But the overwhelming reaction was, there's some really great stuff going on here, particularly in football, particularly with the levels of investment.
What was the general attitude to football that you picked up on from being involved in this project?
They're football mad. The passion for it is on a par with almost any other country in the world. I know that sounds crazy, but per capita, the level of enthusiasm for football, both watching and playing and supporting, is mind-blowing. And this has all changed really in the last 10 years, with the World Cup as a catalyst for that.
Reading some of these accounts, a lot of them sound too good to be true. Does your Qatar project just confirm that the Qatari government are really good at ideological formation? Is that what's happening here? Is the message being passed down to the people?
I think there's probably an element of truth in that. Yeah, there probably is a case that those people living and working in Qatar have absorbed a lot of the messaging that the Qatari government and the World Cup Committee have been projecting for the last 9 years. But the beauty of a project like GoClick is that it's interesting to hear what those people think about their own country or their adopted country. And whether it is a security guard or a worker from Sri Lanka who has come and found new opportunities for themselves and their family, or whether it is a Qatari national who has only known their own country. I think these perspectives are interesting in their own right. I mean, we've worked in North Korea, we've worked in Russia, we've worked in Brazil, all places where you might think that there is a level of governmental messaging that diffuses down to the people. So even if those opinions are very positive and in some cases almost overwhelmingly positive, I think it's still an interesting look at how those citizens see their country and the criticism that is brought their way. I certainly don't believe in eradicating opinions because I just don't think we've heard from those people within this whole debate. We've only really heard from NGOs, the Qatari government, Western media. We haven't heard that much from the people who are on the ground.
You've been to Qatar recently. How did those stories match up with your experiences of being in the country?
My own personal experiences of Qatar were that it was quite a sedate, I was trying not to use the word dull place, but, it feels pretty family orientated. And, I think a lot of the Gulf nations have created for expats and for Qatari nationals or Gulf nationals quite an easy, privileged existence. Now, obviously, the lived experience of migrant labourers is very different, but as a place to be, it wasn't the kind of pariah state where you have to look over your shoulder at every moment that perhaps you expect in some of the narratives that we hear about the place. I found it astonishingly straightforward and, if not, slightly dull. It's my own personal opinion of being there. Sorry to the Qatari Tourist Board, but it has its own unique ways and its own history and its culture. But it's a small place. It's, as I said, 2.6 million people, 90% of them in one city in Doha. It's quite a clean, sanitized existence. And that could be one of the problems around fan experience for fans going, that there's not loads to do. You don't just walk down the street and find something going on. It's a hotel-based entertainment and nightlife. There's not much of a walking culture. So, yeah, I think it'll be a very different experience for people when they go.
Obviously, one of the biggest ethical conundrums when it comes to Qatar is the kafala system, which has led to the deaths of migrant workers. What sort of response would you have to those kinds of issues?
The first thing I say is, what are we specifically talking about? Because there's actually quite a high standard around the World Cup stadiums themselves of how workers are treated on those sites. On the construction of the World Cup stadiums, there's only been 3 recorded deaths of people on those construction sites. One was a very famous example of a British worker, Zach Cox, of which there was a lot of media attention, quite rightly.
Zach Cox died in Qatar in January 2017. A rope access technician, Zach had been involved in renovating one of the World Cup 2022 stadiums when he fell 40 metres to his death.
Most of the people controlling the sites are Brits, actually. If we want to really get into it, there's a lot of British involvement in health and safety in the country now. For instance, the Kempinski Hotel was a South African subcontractor of a German company. It's not the Qataris themselves responsible for a lot of those projects. But the further we get away from the stadiums into roads, hotels, metro, and then into the wider country, there is a general question about oversight of what is going on in the country. The problem is more in the overall health and safety, working conditions. Heat stress is a huge factor, and once the kafala system has been overturned, that's the next focus of a lot of the world's attention. There's also a massive problem with the data collection of how people are dying. It's incredible that the source of information around worker deaths is basically people going up to embassies like the Indian embassy and the Nepali embassy saying how many of our nationals have died, and then extrapolating a number of how many we think have died related to infrastructure projects. It's not helpful when we just say, slave labour, World Cup stadiums, because that's not quite what the issue is. You lose people slightly when you get into the complications of it. I'm hoping that the concerns of the ILO and the ITUC and Amnesty and Human Rights Watch continue to take on board by the Qatari state and the Supreme Committee, and I hope that things continue to get better. Last month, the law around ending the kafala system was approved to a certain degree. It still has to go through a lot of hoops, but that should see, the end of exit visas, the more free movement of peoples. A lot of people won't share my optimism, but that's okay. And it's okay for people to keep holding countries to account, because that's the only way that life will improve in both Qatar, in the wider region, and also in the world.
So what will Liverpool's trip to Qatar tell us about the World Cup in 3 years' time?
I'm really interested to see what is flushed out. The Qatari authorities are going to bend over backwards to make sure that Liverpool have a good time, as slightly twee as that sounds. They're going to want to welcome fans and make sure that they have a good time and have access to alcohol in proportional amounts, and that their LGBT fans are welcome. These are the noises that are coming out of the Supreme Committee. Liverpool seem relatively reassured, but let's not kid ourselves. We're all expecting certain issues to come up during the time that Liverpool are there. It's a bit of a watching brief to see what is flushed out. There's bound to be a new story that emerges. I think if Liverpool's arrival in Qatar can focus the minds on what else is going on in the country, that's a good thing. And actually, I do believe that the Qatar authorities are open to that level of scrutiny. This is clearly a problem in the country, and I think Liverpool's arrival there is going to bring a lot of things to the surface, and the closer we get to the tournament, the more that will happen.
Ian Doyle is Chief Liverpool Writer for the Liverpool ECHO. Joe Blott is Chair of Spirit of Shankly, a Liverpool FC supporters group. Matthew Barrett is the co-founder of GoClick, a global storytelling project. This episode was produced by Josh Schneider-Weiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and rate on iTunes, or share the episode with a friend. See you next time.